topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Welcome to Leadership for Life with Gina Gardner on W4CY Radio and Talk4 TV. Join your host, who is a multiple #1 international best-selling author, motivational speaker, empowerment and transformational leadership coach and trainer. She's the founder of Genuinely-You and has 30 years experience of helping people step into their genuine, authentic power. And now, here is Gina Gardner, your host of Leadership for Life.
Hello there, and welcome to this show, and it's a show that means a huge amount to me. It's not going to follow the same pattern as normal, and I'll explain why that's happening in a moment. 1 in 2 people will develop cancer in the Western world during their lifetime. The statistics are stark. And one of the challenges if you have been diagnosed with cancer is how you navigate a way to your to hopefully you being able to say that you are in remission long term and that you can live a really productive and good quality of life. One of the challenges is how you, if you are the patient or you have somebody in your family that you love who is diagnosed with cancer, is how you can best help yourself. And one of the things that's become very evident to me over the last 2 or 3 years is that we need to take a significant amount of responsibility for our health and well-being if we want to get the best out of life. And that goes whether or not you've got cancer or not. But a really close friend of mine, somebody who I love very much, developed triple negative cancer 3 years ago. And she put herself in the hands of the oncologist. Now, I want to make things very, very clear. I am not anti-doctor. Absolutely not. We need doctors and they do a pretty good job. And we would be in trouble without having them. But what I do want to question is how many people go to the doctor and hand over the responsibility of their well-being to the doctor and take everything that is said as gospel. And I would question that as being a really sensible thing to do. Now, that doesn't mean I don't trust them. It means that I need to question, I need to find out for myself, and I need to be really clear about what I'm doing with my body and why, and be able to make informed decisions because I've got the right amount of information. I'm going to go into Vicky's story in a bit more detail in a moment. But before I do, I just want to remind those of you who are familiar with the show will know that we are very proud members of B1G1, Buy One, Give One. And anybody who asks a question during the live show or makes a comment or sends an email on one of the downloads, because this will be downloaded onto the W4CY Leadership for Life YouTube channel or onto one of the main podcast platforms, Pandora, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Apple, and so on. If you send an email and you ask a question, we will donate on your behalf to B1G1, which has programs all around the world in terms of health, education, clean water, and the environment, and so on. So please do comment, do ask questions, do spread the word for this, because this is a program that's not about fluff. What you learn in this program could actually save your life. And it's really important that you, I think, recognize that this comes from a place of wanting to support you and help you, not from a place of criticism. That's really important to me that you take that on board. If you're a doctor listening to this, then I would say to you, please listen with an open mind. Please recognize that actually, maybe there are ways that are different to yours that can enhance what you do, rather than closing your mind to other ways because they are not the recognized way that you've been using. So please be open-minded about it. So let's get back to Vicky. Vicky was diagnosed with triple negative breast cancer, and she underwent chemotherapy, then surgery, and then chemotherapy, radiotherapy, and then chemo again. And she was told, off you go. And off she went. She asked the doctors, was there anything she could do to help herself? And the answer was no, just go and live your life. Within a very short time, it came back. And when she went to the oncologist, she was offered chemo. And whilst the words were not these, the underlying principles were, we will give you chemo until either the disease kills you or the chemo is so destructive that you can't take it anymore. And effectively, that will be the end of it. We did research, Vicky particularly through some self-help groups, and she came across a treatment called CyberKnife. And I suggested that perhaps because it was in just one discrete place, that maybe surgery would be an option. We went to see the oncologist, and the oncologist said, no, not suitable for either of them, can't possibly help. No, chemo's the right way to go. I'd gone along as a cavalry, and I said to the oncologist, look, she's got 2 children. Her living, her surviving is so important. Isn't it just worth trying? So quite begrudgingly, she wrote the letters. Within a week, Vicky had an appointment to go and see the CyberKnife people. And within 10 days, she had an appointment to go and see the surgeon. Both said she was a perfect candidate. She had CyberKnife treatment and for 2 years appeared to be free of the cancer. 2 very good quality years that she wouldn't have had if she hadn't researched and questioned. Now, around the time that things were going very well, we came across a book by a lady called Jane McLelland called How to Starve Your Cancer. But because we were in a position where we thought the cancer had gone, we sort of dabbled, but we didn't really take too much notice of it until it came back this year. And so we started to read the book, and the book shares the most inspirational story of Jane McLelland's own journey with cancer. And I'm absolutely thrilled that she has agreed to join me on the show today. And we're going to explore not only her story, but what she's done as a result of it. You know, you'll have heard me say on this show many, many times, it's not the challenge that defines us, but it's what we do with it. And this remarkable lady has done some amazing things which have arisen out of her own challenge with cancer. So I'd like to read you her bio. Let me just read that to you. And then I'm going to invite Jane on. And for the rest of the show, we're going to have Jane and we're going to be talking to her and exploring her journey and her way of dealing with cancer, which is helping many, many other people. Jane McLelland is an international best-selling author of How to Starve Your Cancer, with a second edition of the book just released this year, and a hugely popular educational online course on teachable.com. She's the winner of the New York, the NYC Big Book Award, winner of Amazing Women Global Award 2019, winner of the GTEC Social Impact Award 2020, and an international speaker. She's a passionate advocate for cancer patients and a tireless researcher, helping them to find the treatments they need, focusing on shutting down the cancer metabolism. So without more ado, I would like to welcome Jane onto the show.
Hi, Gina.
Hello there, and thank you so much for joining me.
A pleasure.
I'd like to start, if you're agreeable, with you sharing your amazing journey, because there's nobody who can talk to you about and say, well, you don't understand, you know, what are you doing? So Please share with us your journey.
Well, I was very much in the same position as your friend, who really didn't know very much when you're thrown into the situation with cancer. I seriously knew very little. I was a physiotherapist. I had trained and done a little bit of work, but oncology was not my area of expertise. I didn't know anything about it. So I initially just went through the surgery, the radio, and the chemo as everybody else does. But then, it was developing from that I actually learned so much about it. And initially I was diagnosed with cervical cancer in 94. That's a long time ago now. But that was when I was still working as a physio. It was a big, devastating blow for me because I was only 30, and that meant that I was going to lose my ability to have children. So that was really crushing. And that actually upset me probably more than the cancer at the time. I was given assurances that it was not going to come back, or that, lots of noises were made to sort of suggest that I have the treatment and I'd be fine. But sadly, that actually wasn't the case. So in 1999, it came back in my lungs. And at that point, I'd already done some research because my mother had died in 96 of breast cancer. And that had woken me up to looking at alternatives and looking around the subject. But back then it was really hard to find information about, things to do and what to take. And there was no Facebook, no internet chat rooms, nothing like that. It was a really hard time to try and explore and find different treatments. And I'm thankful that I did find some really wonderful integrative doctors to quiz and to sort of pick their brains. And I had, 2 or 3 at the time. I just wanted to get as much info out of them as I possibly could. And for a while I was fine. I was ticking along. I managed to suppress, even though it was stage 4 at this time, and they sort of given me weeks to live. I managed to, extend that, and I was doing okay. But then by 2003, we noticed changes happening in my blood. I had a deleted P53 gene. I had changes and other things. And then that meant that I was having another recurrence of cancer, but it was a different cancer because my cervical markers were completely normal still, but everything suggested, and the blood looked abnormal, that I was getting this myelodysplasia, which then mutates into acute myeloid leukemia pretty fast. And I've since had it confirmed as well. So I then went on another journey of, upping my game, because that wasn't enough.
Can I just stop? Because I think it's really important that people who are watching or listening, at the point that you discovered that you had the leukemia, you were not given much chance of survival, were you? That's
treatment-related leukemia, because it was a result of the chemo and the radiotherapy that I'd had years earlier. It tends to occur between 7 to 9 years after your treatment, and people are now living longer, and actually more people are actually starting to get this type of bone marrow cancer and leukemia. So it was a result of the treatment, which meant I was totally turned off having any more chemo at that point. I'm not anti-chemo generally, and I'd had 2 rounds of it, but this time round I decided I would take this leap of faith and try a different route. And at that point I researched all sorts of articles, and I learned and I educated myself, and I'd really decided that trying, and I knew it wasn't just a single thing that would help cancer. I would need a combination of treatments to actually attack it in different ways. And I'd understood things like glucose feeding it, and I knew about IGF-1, but I didn't know as much as I know now. But that the literature has kind of gone bananas, and it just blown up with all sorts of information about cancer metabolism. It's been kind of the thing for the last few years in research. Hasn't reached the clinic yet, but it is what researchers are looking at. But I discovered several off-label drugs that I knew could possibly help me, and more research has come out all the time about these drugs, and their anti-cancer effects. And dipridamol was one of them. It's an antiplatelet drug normally given for people with heart valve issues. It was actually a forerunner to statins. It was kind of like the stroke prevention drug before statins became the drug du jour. But actually I took a statin as well, because they both work on cholesterol pathways, interestingly. I didn't know about the pretty well working on cholesterol at the time, I knew that it had other effects, that it's a nucleoside salvage inhibitor, and that stopped protein chunks for making DNA getting into the cell and being used to make new daughter cells. So I knew about that. I knew it had those anti-cancer effects, and I knew statins showed a good evidence for increasing my survival by possibly, if I was lucky, 7 months. So I took that on board. So that added to my cocktail. And then I used a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug called Etodolac, which is normally used for arthritis. That went into my mix because it made the statin work 5 times better. So I was thinking, okay, well, maybe I'll extend my life more. I don't know. And then, it just added. And I then carried on. I had intravenous vitamin C, I had berberine, I had quercetin, I had omega-3s, I had, there was a whole host of supplements that I took just to boost my metabolism, boost my my healthiness. But also I knew I was probably blocking pathways that the cancer wanted to use to feed itself, and that was key. But beyond that, I was obviously changing my diet. I was doing more exercise. So there are many things I'd altered in my life. And certainly I was emotionally, initially, I'd been really distraught with the whole lack of fertility. But then by the time I got stage 4, I thought, well, I'm going to die, aren't I? So there's no point being depressed about that anymore. I might as well just focus on surviving. And the surrogacy and things then ended up. So I do actually now have a fabulous family. I've got 2 boys. Everything worked out in the end, but it was a real battle and a journey to get where I wanted to be. All the way through, it was just being like punched in the stomach so many times. And you just think, wow, how can I get through it this time? What do I have to do now? And I'm sure there are a lot of people out there who may listen to this, who've got cancer, who've maybe had it come back, who know that feeling of dismay and the real sort of gut-wrenching feeling that, oh my God, I've got to go through this all over again. It's just the worst feeling. It really is. So it's something I've tried to raise from my head, but I'm kind of, I live it a little bit when I talk to other people, and actually going back and talking to. I was hoping my book was going to be out there and it would sort of leave people the sort of the how-to bit. So here you go, off you go. Don't bother me anymore. I've done that, but it hasn't worked out that way at all.
I'm sure it hasn't. I've just tried to. I thought I'd put the book right here, but I have obviously left it on the dining room table. I was going to hold it up, and you actually got your book.
Well, I've actually got one just over there. If you wait 1 sec, I can show it.
Now, while you're doing that, Jane had a nickname, and her nickname was Maracas because of all of the tablets that she took, that she was always felt as if she was shaking. And I know that because Vicky has started on a number of these things, that the number of pills and supplements and things is quite significant. And show them the book. I've looked at, I half read the first version, and I've now read the second version twice. I have to say the second version is so much easier to navigate. Thank you very much indeed.
Yes, the index.
It makes such a lot of difference. But one of the things that I think for people who are perhaps hearing this for the first time, and I know when I read your book for the first time, getting your head around the understanding of pathways in terms of cancer is quite a leap, really, to understand the pathways. And so in simple language, my understanding is that the cancers get fed in order to grow and to multiply. And if you can cut off their food supply, then they are much less able to do that. And I know in your book you talk about then killing the cancer, but let's for the moment talk about starving the cancer. So would you like to explain to people, why that's so important and how it sort of works, but in real layman's terms, so that anybody who has no idea of your book or no idea of this, but perhaps one of the things I've noticed, I've had a number of friends with cancer to start with, that their brain is like,
right. I mean, particularly if they've had chemo, that's it, twice as bad.
So for the uninitiated, let's do the really simple step-by-step version, if we may.
Well, the simple step-by-step version is that everybody kind of knows that sugar feeds cancer. It's kind of like the big thing that almost everybody knows, but a lot of oncologists will deny. But it was shown back in the 1920s that cancer has this really avid appetite for glucose, and it'll take up almost 10 times as much as normal healthy cells, because it's trying to fuel it, and that provides the energy for the division and the creation of its daughter cells. So from one, it sort of divides into two, etc. But the old theory was that it was just the nucleus inside the cell that was responsible for cancer, and that it was the all the DNA inside that was the key. But actually, it's turned out that it isn't that at all. It is the mitochondria, the little energy houses that live in the cytoplasm, in the main body of the cell, but not the nucleus. And this is what causes the problem. It is actually defects in the mitochondria, which are caused by the tumor microenvironment sending messages in and altering the way that they make energy. Possibly it might even be, we don't know yet, and they haven't looked and studied this particularly deeply yet, but there may be bacteria getting into the cell, very tiny bacteria, or there may be the influence of parasites on the outside sending signals in. But we do know that there are little tiny RNA that go in and tell the cell to behave differently. But it's not just glucose. They also, the problem is the cancer cell is really clever, and it doesn't just use glucose. It can learn to use glutamine, which is an amino acid, and that's a protein. And sadly, that's the most abundant protein in the body. But you can't stop the amino acid being in your body. You just have to stop the access getting, the cancer getting access to the glutamine. And then you've got fat as well, and that's kind of that's used for fuel. It's used for communication. It's used for spreading metastases. It's actually far more important than many people realize, and you need to eat the right fat to make sure. And saturated fat is something you need to avoid when you have cancer, but eating the right fats is really critically important. But those are your three macros in your diet: carb, protein, and fat. And cancer can use all three, and ketones as well, in the right circumstances, and with BRAF mutated cancers, which are very common in melanomas, skin cancers, and sometimes in colorectal cancer, they can use ketones. So you have to be a little bit careful sometimes about your diet, but it's about feeding the cancer and it being able to switch from one pathway to use it, from glucose to using glutamine to using fat. And it can, most cancers rely heavily on the glucose, but they also use these other pathways as well. So it's something that requires, it's a complex disease, and it took me a while to sort of work out and try and simplify what is a really, really complex metabolism, to try and simplify into like a little triangle with the three macros, and actually say, right, these fuel lines are the glucose, these are the glutamine ones, and these are the fat ones. So it was a lot of research, and it kind of looks very simple, and you think, oh, well, it didn't happen overnight.
I'm sure it didn't. I'm sure. One of the things that really helped me understand it was when you talked about the way in which the cancers can change how they operate. To, if you're going on a journey, and you use the example of the London Underground. Now, for those of you that are in the States, the London Underground is our subway, and there are several different lines on the subway. and they're all interconnected. I believe you have the same sort of thing if you go to the New York subway, that they have different lines.
Yeah.
And that if one of the railway lines was closed down for some reason, you would just reroute and find another way. And it might take a little bit longer, but you would still find another way to your destination. And if the worst came to the worst, you'd go back upstairs and you'd get a taxi, but you'd find another way to get there. And that the cancers operate very much in the same way. If you take one food away from them, but you don't do anything about the others, they will then say, well, I can't have that, but actually I will find a way of using something else. Clever little bugger. It finds its way to do that.
And that's why it's been so hard to actually cure, and for people to look at really useful treatments that will actually stop and block all those different pathways, because the metabolism has taken a really back seat ever since the 1950s, when they discovered the p53 gene. And prior to that, Otto Warburg was kind of like the big thing. And then in the 1950s, it all suddenly switched to it's all about genetics. And they kind of forgot about the metabolism and how important that was, or the significance of it. But if you look at what the p53 does, it increases the uptake of sugar, it increases the uptake of glutamine as well. Those are two key pathways that it really operates and influences, and that is something that it does with every cancer. And because it influences every cancer, they were obsessed by the fact it was all in the nucleus and the gene. But no, the gene expresses certain things, and it actually, it's in response. It's what happens in the nucleus is in response to what's happening in the mitochondria, and the mitochondria are telling it to do certain things. So it's downstream, if you know what I mean. It's not an upstream event.
It's an effect, not a cause.
Correct. Yeah.
So it strikes me that what we can do ourselves to avoid cancer in the first place, or certainly when you have cancer, is that there are certain foods that we all know aren't very good for us that we can avoid. So a diet that's heavily full of processed foods, or too much saturated fat, or too much sugar, all of those add to your risk factor, not only for cancer, but for heart disease and stroke and all sorts of diabetes. Well, I'd be interested in know, why do you think that the vast majority of, certainly looking at your book in terms of the research from the people who are using your protocol, that the number of oncologists who are very dismissive of diet, and in fact, only a few weeks ago, I was sitting in the office with Vicky, and she asked the oncologist, how can I help myself? And again, she was told there's no way to help yourself. Just rely on, basically, they didn't say it. The words were, no, there's nothing you can do to help yourself. And I find that hugely worrying.
Oh, more than worry. I mean, it's devastating for the patient to be told that. And it doesn't matter what comes out of the oncologist's mouth, that you kind of believe it. If you're the patient, you're kind of inbuilt to accept anything they say as gospel. It's very hard to question and go, you know what, you might be wrong. But to actually say that out loud kind of feels like Travis, you shouldn't say it. And it's really hard to convince yourself that your beliefs are actually stronger, and you have to sit there and go, no, I know better. And you don't want to alienate your doctor, so you have to kind of go along with them, because you're in their hands. And it's a very tricky situation, because they know that they have this power and control, and they can give you, they're really in charge of your life or death, to be honest. I mean, they can overtreat you with chemo, they can undertreat you with chemo. Are they getting it right? And it's a really tricky balance trying to keep them on side, and yet that there are a lot more things that you can do, and diet certainly is an area where people can take back that control and actually start to feel some ownership of the problem and feel like they have some influence on the outcome, because otherwise you're just a passive bystander. You're in that passenger seat, you're not in the driving seat, and you don't feel that you have the ability to turn the corners when you want, and it's a very hard position to be in.
And I think, whilst cancer is, we're talking about cancer. I mean, I have a long history, having had a ski accident in 1983, 2 failed back surgeries, learnt to walk twice. And so one of the things that really resonated with me is how the parallels are there. And I was, the first surgeon that I worked with, and I quote when I had failed back surgery was, "The operation was a success, my dear. It's you who's the failure." Okay. The second time, still failed back surgery, but a fabulous neurosurgeon who worked with me to help me get the best functionality I could. And I don't know if you've ever read the book called Blink, but it talks about around intuition and the relationship that you have with your own intuition and with other people. And it talked in the book, it talks about how many doctors, and it's part of their training, really, they're conditioned that they very quickly look for the diagnosis, and then having got a diagnosis to try to prove the diagnosis is right. Where those doctors who are much more open-minded and who take a little longer to really test their theory actually make better diagnoses. But the paradox is that the doctors who create a good relationship with their patients, however bad they are, don't get sued. But you can have a cracking doctor who's really good, but if they don't make eye contact and make that relationship, they are likely to get sued. And I think one of the challenges we have in Western medicine is people rarely get challenged for doing too much rather than doing too little. And one of the conversations we had with the GP is that we can't give you false hope, because if we give you false hope, then people can sue us.
Which is ridiculous, because there's no such thing as false hope. I mean, yes, you shouldn't promise that you are going to make someone see, if you know somebody's got stage 4, to say, I'll help you see your daughter's wedding, which who knows is another 30 years away or something. To make statements like that is rash and ridiculous. But to say, look, there are options out there, and let's try these, and with any luck we should get a better result, and that's where we are. I don't like to tell people, yes, you're going to be cured or anything like that. I couldn't possibly say things like that. No. But what I can say is that I know that the treatments, if you block these metabolic routes, you can slow down the cancer. With any luck, you'll reverse it and hopefully, go into remission. And that has happened with quite a large number of people now. So I can tell you categorically that it can happen. So, not just me. So there is that, and it's not fake hope, it is real hope. And the fact that other people are achieving that, and unfortunately, we don't have data yet. We don't have enough evidence to support. I mean, I will be doing an app at some point to try and get some data in to try and show that these combinations, that what I'm suggesting does work. I mean, the Care Oncology Clinic, who provide, thankfully, a very similar cocktail to the one that I did in many respects. I mean, it involves metformin, statin, and they've got mebendazole, which is an anti-worming drug, very low toxicity, and then doxycycline, which is an antibiotic. Their combination has already been shown to at least double the life of patients with brain cancer, but it's also showing similar results with other patients. They just haven't been going long enough to prove that yet. But with GBM, the life expectancy is normally so short that it's the easiest one to say, let's have a look at these results and see whether we can make that better. But actually with triple negative, they're showing that as well. So it'll get there, that the data will come out eventually to show that, you can extend. And a lot of these people are going into remission as well. So, it's early days yet, and we're still looking at it. And obviously, if we could get people to go earlier and to treat their cancers with these combinations a bit earlier, you could stop them from progressing from a stage 1 or 2 to that terrible and more tricky, more challenging stage at the end. It's not such an effort, because the more it progresses, kind of the more you have to throw at it to try and get it back, if you know what I mean. So it becomes,
like I say, it's very much why I wanted you to come on the show, because had we understood this earlier on, then I don't think we'd be in the same position that things are now. Yeah. One of the things I think it's important, and I know we're sort of looping about, but different cancers have very different profiles, don't they? And one of the things that you talk about is get to know your own cancer, and make sure that you're working with your particular cancer. I'd be really grateful if you could speak to that, because I think it's something that people need to recognise, and it's quite complex.
Yeah, well, it is a bit complex, but each cancer will have a different metabolic fingerprint, if you like. So it expresses different, it uses different nutrients in different ways. But there are key metabolic pathways that are common to all cancers, but it's which ones are dominant. So is the GLUT1 more dominant than the GLUT3, which is these are glucose receptors on the surface. So myeloma, for example, we use GLUT4, which is a really tricky one, because that's the one that's normally used to feed your muscles. So how do you block that? You kind of can't really, without sort of stopping the glucose getting to your muscles. But stopping the other, so it becomes some things are more challenging. But myeloma, for example, we use something called the proteasome more, and that's something that can be blocked as well with supplements, and disulfiram, which is an old it's a drug that stops people from drinking too much. It gives you one hell of a hangover if you take it and you drink at the same time. It's apparently horrendous. But so there are things that can help all these different cancers, but I want to create this kind of database of things that I know will help. I'm trying to put together a cocktail for pancreatic cancer at the moment, and I'm trying to get some of these big funds to actually put this into a trial, because I really want to see proper trials that will actually convince doctors it's not just story
woo and pink and fluffy. Is anything but pink and fluffy?
No.
So now I've read your book, as I say, but we also did the course. And if anybody's listening to this, I would really urge you, read the book first and then do the course, and then the book really starts to make sense. But if you've done the course first and then without the book, then I don't think it would fit into place. But it was rather like doing a 3D jigsaw puzzle. And as you did the course, so the pieces got put into the right places in the 3D jigsaw puzzle. And I thought it was very well done. It's structured into short videos that just give you a bite-sized chunk. And I would urge you, if you're the one with cancer, it's great to have a buddy do it with you. Because if you've got chemo brain, having somebody to take notes, and we took notes and then made spreadsheets and so on of it all. How do you go? I mean, I understand your motivation, but creating something like the book and like the course, how did you go about it? Because you've got this huge amount of information. How do you?
And that was the thing. I just knew I couldn't sit on it. That it was wrong for me to have this information. I was having found the Care Oncology Clinic, it was like, hallelujah, someone's actually doing something similar to me. I'd been pushing and trying to get patients and friends who I'd met who said, how did you do it? What should I take? And I'd be researching for them. I'd find all sorts of different cocktails of things. And I'd say, well, try and get this, that, and the other. Nobody was getting anywhere. They were all getting the hand from the oncologist. Nobody was getting any prescriptions for metformin, for statins. These would come up regularly as in the research as things to add into the cocktails. So I was dismayed, but then suddenly coming across this article, it was in the Telegraph about the Care Oncology Clinic, was just a revelation to me. And so I got into contact with them. I said, well, come on, we got to spread the word. And they said, go on, write your book. And I was thinking, oh, shall I? It took a long time for me to sit down, and I'd never really written a book before. I'd done some things before, but not really sat down and written a whole book like that. I mean, that was
and it's quite show the book again so people can recognize it, because it is quite a weighty tome.
Yeah, that's pretty thick, and it's not, it's not tiny, it's not big writing. No. That's normal size.
It's not bedtime reading, let me tell you. You have to be awake. However,
that's a bit easier. So half the book is my stories. It's a lot easier to read.
Yeah.
But part 2 is kind of a little bit more sciencey, and there is quite a lot to take in.
But you can't. I thought about this a lot, actually, as we were reading it, and as I was reading it for the second time before this interview, and having done the course. Your challenge is, if you dumb it down to too much, it then becomes meaningless.
Yes, exactly. I had to find a way to explain it to people in a way that was simpler than showing the normal map of metabolism is such a spidery web of you can't possibly make head or tail out of it if you are a layperson. And I just tried to simplify it and find the key pathways that I knew were really important, and focus on those. That there are other pathways that I haven't mentioned, in that, I mean, we could go on forever with endlessly going down little rabbit holes, but I wanted to focus on the really important ones that I thought. And I may be, there may be ones that may be more important for some cancers that I haven't mentioned. And I will be doing more research into individual cancers to look at that. And to so when I create the app, hopefully I'll be looking at, and I want to get sort of focus groups of different cancers, so I can actually work with them to really try and find out the best approach for each one. But yeah.
Before we go on, I just want to go back to Care Oncology, because my impression of Care Oncology from the research I've done is that not only are they prescribing the 4 drugs, but they're actually a clinical trial in motion, because they're taking note of what people supplements and diet and so on, and they are being able to aggregate that information. So they will have a body of information that they can use with the general medical profession. And it just seems to me that's going to be a really great piece of work, but it's going to take a bit of time, as you say.
Well, I don't know that they've gone to, I mean, I've asked them what they're doing with all the data on the supplements, etc. I don't think they're actually using that at the moment. They're just looking at the data on which is where I'm thinking I should step in and actually analyze that myself, and try and create an app that will really spew out some useful information, with just, we're looking at, I don't want to look at absolutely everything. I've got to nail it down to certain things, otherwise we'll get lost.
Yes.
But with off-label drugs and with supplements and some lifestyle factors as well, exercise and sleep, for example, looking at those kind of things and the influence of that. And stress. So I want to look at those kind of factors as well, and see where we go. I mean, it's a fairly big project, and it's going to take me a while to get this thing together. And I'm trying to raise money through the online course to do that.
Yes.
I should maybe do a crowdfunder. I don't know. It's
well, certainly if there's somebody listening to this who has an interest and wants to back you, then please get in touch, because this is a really important piece of work.
Yeah.
I want to spend a bit of time where I'm just looking at, we've got a very few minutes left. The protocol is not for the faint-hearted, I have to say. Changing your diet significantly is quite hard, particularly if you're somebody who loves their food and has a particular way of eating. But we've talked about off-label drugs, and there'll be people who won't understand what you mean by off-label.
That means that metformin, for example, is on the label, it says it's for diabetes, type 2 diabetes, but actually we are using it for cancer. So it's an off-label. It means it's used for another condition that is not that it's not normally prescribed for.
Right. Thank you. The other thing is that there'll be many people who are listening to this who are on a very limited budget.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's become very evident working with Vicky is that the supplements can be incredibly, not as individuals, but when you put them all together, it can be a significant amount of money.
And that is quite a burden. And I kind of want to help people with that as well by sort of putting combination pills together for people so that you take 5 instead of
53.
20. Yeah, I know. But that's in the pipeline as well. But it is a significant amount of investment. People do crowdfunders just to keep themselves going, and I suggest anybody who wants to do this. I mean, the key is to get if you can get prescription drugs, and on the NHS, we're lucky that we can get a lot of things for free. If you have cancer and you can get the NHS to prescribe, you can get them for free. So if you can get a drug that covers many of those pathways, then it's kind of much cheaper. I don't know that it's the same in the States, but it's you can get a lot of these things covered and the prescriptions for free. So certainly I know a lot of people just want to do everything naturally, but the off-label drugs do have low toxicity, and a lot of people hate statins and think they're the worst things on the planet. They've received a lot of negative press, and it's mostly not in the media. Actually, it's more social media where people slate them, and that changes people's opinion as to whether they should take them or not. They are very useful for many cancers.
We've got 2 minutes left, and there are several things I still want to do. You've got a Facebook group where people can go and join the Facebook group if they've got cancer or they're helping somebody with cancer. The Facebook group is called
Jane McLelland, Off-Label Drugs for Cancer. Bit of a mouthful. I'm sorry about that.
Okay. And I would really urge you to go and have a look. I just want to spend a minute. Vicky and I have, in fact, it got published today. I haven't got a copy of the book, but I've got a copy of the cover. We've just written a little book, which is about your life in their hands. Where does the responsibility live? And it's exploring the partnership between you and your doctor and the relationship you have with yourself. It's a little book. It's very, very inexpensive. And there's a checklist at the back of how you can approach talking to professionals. And it shares with you a bit of our story and about Jane and where you can find Jane. So go and have a look. It's got published today on Amazon. So that's brilliant. Jane, you're going to have to come back again because there's still so much to talk about. You've been an absolute pleasure. Lastly, your B1G1 project is all about education. I haven't got time to go into it now, but thank you so much for joining me. It has been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks, Gina.
And you'll have to come back again. Thanks very much.
I will certainly do that. Okay.
Lovely. For those of you who are listening, please spread the word. Make sure that anybody that you know who is facing cancer knows about Jane McLelland and how to starve your cancer. It could save their life. It could save your life. But whatever, be the leader in your own life. Take care now. Bye-bye.
You have been listening to The Leadership for Life with your host, Gina Gardner. Make sure you tune in to W4CY Radio and Talk 4 TV next Thursday and every Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time for more Leadership for Life. If you missed any part of this episode or just want to hear or see it again, you can find the archive of the TV show on Talk 4 TV's YouTube channel and the podcast of The Leadership for Life on iHeartRadio, Pandora, Spotify, Amazon Music, and wherever you listen to your podcast.